Hello, this is Sophie Lawson from sophielawson.com, and this is episode 172 of the Sophie Art Podcast, which is a little podcast that I do about the art and things with my co-host lilDENNiS. And lilDENNiS is back once again with us, and today we are going to be talking about studying. But I haven't really got any notes for this one. What I'm going to do really is I'm just going to talk about how I take notes, and well, some of the things are going to be like traditional note-taking versus digital note-taking, repeating, the power of repetition with studying, and how I'm going to compare like studying from books and courses. Slow, I've put the word slow, because I feel like with studying it's all about being slow and steady wins the race. Because sometimes I've noticed that I want to sort of rush when I'm studying, but it's always better. Well, it goes to this quote I know. There's this beautiful little quote: when you rush, you delay. When you take your time, that's when you slow down or something. But it's the first bit really I like. When you rush, you delay. Because you feel like rushing would actually be better. You feel like going quicker would be better, but it's weird. When you go slower, you actually go quicker. And that's really true with studying. That's what I've noticed. I'm also going to repeat what I learned. So I'm going to talk about how I study basically, and I'm also going to talk about Procreate a little tiny weeny bit, because the reason I'm doing this podcast here, I've decided that I'll set a date. So the 1st of August 2021 is when I'm going to start studying from Procreate, and so the reason I'm doing this podcast really is to just it's just for me really. I know it's a bit weird, but it's to remind myself how to study, because it's probably been about 6 or 8 months since I did any studying, because what I was doing was I was studying from SVS Learn. So I'll put links and everything in the show notes at sophielawson.com, and if you're watching on YouTube at youtube.com/sophielawson, I'll also put links in the description. But I was studying from this website called Society of Visual Storytelling, which is SVS Learn, and I'm actually going to play a little clip in a minute from their podcast. So they got a podcast called 3 Point Perspective. I was listening to it this morning as well, which was quite cool, because it sort of synced up with what I'm talking about here, or some of the things. So, well, little Kitty is here with us as well. I love little Kitty. So lilDENNiS and Kitty have a little kiss. Ooh, they're having a bit of a snog today. Yeah, little Kitty and lilDENNiS. So little Kitty is going to sit down and behave herself. lilDENNiS is going to get us into this one. Boing! Love that little sound. It's the sound of the gong, which means it's time to get into it. So lilDENNiS is going to sit in his little house today, I think. So where shall I start with this one? Well, I think what I'm going to start with is how I take my notes. So what I do is, when I'm studying, actually I'm going to start with the books. I prefer to study from books. So it's weird, because most of my studying has actually been from online courses, like SVS Learn, Stan Prokopenko with his figure drawing course, and also Paintable. I did a couple months with Paintable, Control-Alt-Paint as well. That was another one that's cool. But the thing I've noticed is, when I'm studying from books, I feel like I can take my time a lot more, and also it's much easier to go back and forth. So if I'm going through a book, trying to study from a book, what I've noticed is it's like you can mark. So as you're going through the book, you can sort of mark stuff. So let's say you're going through a bit about a nose, learning how to draw the nose, and you see a bit and you think, I really want to keep this. What you do is you can mark it with like a little one of those sticky things. Later on, you might be studying something else, and you've got to draw a nose, and you think, there's a bit here about the nose. It's very easy to quickly go back and have a recap on the nose. Whereas what I've noticed is, when I'm working with these online courses, it takes a little bit more time for me to find out what I want. Because what I've noticed is, when you're studying, you're constantly going back and forth over your notes as you're learning, because you learn stuff, but there's a lot of stuff you don't learn, which is why I think it's really cool to go through the same book multiple times. Keys to Drawing by Bert Dodgson, I've actually studied from that book 3 times now, like really slowly as well. And what I noticed was that the second time I did it, I learned just as much as the first time, but I learned different things. So what I've noticed there is you can study from the same thing and still learn stuff. So it means you're not really learning everything. But I guess what happens is, I've heard someone else talk about this. You've got a certain skill level. So as you're studying, you're sort of studying for that skill level. But as you get better, you will understand things that you couldn't understand before. That was Bert Dodgson's Key to Drawing. There were some things in there I remember as he was going through it. Well, I think one of them was negative spaces. Yeah, the first time I found out about negative spaces, I couldn't understand it. What happened then was I went to life drawing and stuff, and I really started to see these negative spaces popping out at me. So then when I went back to Bert Dodgson's Keys to Drawing book, when I reread that chapter on the negative spaces, all of a sudden it made sense, and I could actually learn a lot more because I understood what he was saying. Whereas before, what happened was the first time I learnt about it, it helped me look through it. But then the second time I went back and studied it, I now knew what I was looking at, so it sort of helped me understand more what I was looking at. So there's these two things here, but that's brilliant. And the thing with the courses is, I just find it a little bit harder to sort of go back and forth. And the other thing is, there's something about holding a book in your hand as you're learning. It just feels a lot more, I don't know what it is, it just feels a lot more easier for me to not be distracted, I suppose. That's the other thing. But it's a bit like these magazines and art books. I love getting art magazines because you're actually touching the thing. You can really get in there and have a look at it. Whereas again, with the courses, that I almost feel, I know what it is. When I'm studying from an online course, I always feel a little bit separate, a little bit detached from it. I think it's the screen. It's almost like this separation. Whereas when I'm studying from an art book, I feel a lot more like I'm connected to it. But the sad thing, I suppose, is that 90% of the studying is in online courses now. So you've sort of got to study from online courses. But what I like about SVS Learn is they actually do these little PDF files. Procreate does it as well. So what happens then is you get the best of both worlds, really. You get to study from the online course, but you also get these little books that you can print out. So that's one of the things I do as well, is when I'm studying from these courses, if they have any things to print out, I always print them out. That's actually the first thing I do. Before I even get into it, I print everything out, because then again, as I'm learning, I'm not getting distracted. Because if I'm in the middle of studying from an online course and they say, right, what we want you to do now is, we want you to refer to this thing, this like separate file. If I've already got it printed out, I don't have to go and print it out. So in other words, because what I've noticed is when you're studying, you get into like a rhythm. You get into it, and if anything takes you out of that, it takes you ages to get back into it. So this is what I noticed was if I printed everything out, if I printed all my resources out before I got into the studying, it meant that as I started studying, I'm ready to go. I'm not going to get pulled out of the experience, sort of thing. But this is one of the reasons why I love studying from art books. All of the resources are actually in the book, so there really is no way to get distracted when you're working from an art book, unless there's something in your external environment, like a person or something. Whereas with online courses, so what I've noticed is you've got to do the work up front with the online courses. You got to put about, I don't know, let's just say 5 to 10 minutes getting prepared before you go into the online course, making sure you've got all your downloaded resources and things. Yeah, because like one of the good things with SVS Learn, one of the exercises you had to do was, Jake Parker, one of the artists, he actually drew these little characters, and what you had to do was print the characters out, but the way he'd done it, was the lines were very faint, so you were learning how to practice inking. So what you had to do was, you had to ink over the top of these drawings. That was one of the exercises, I think. I think this was this one. Well, one of them you had to draw it yourself. One of them you actually had to draw over the top of these little drawings. So what was brilliant about that was, if you've already got it already printed out, you haven't got to get distracted. But I suppose in a weird way, that's actually an advantage over these books. Because in the books, well, unless they had like a page that you could rip out, you can't actually do, well, you could trace over the top of it. Yeah. So really for me, books are the best way to learn, I think. But it's weird, books are the best way to learn, but the best content seems to be online. So the ideal world would be, I'll tell you what would be brilliant, is if people like SVS Learn created a book, an SVS Learn study book, with basically all the courses inside of the book. That would be the best thing for me. I'm going to play this little clip. So there's a little clip here from episode 48 of the 3-Point Perspective, which is the SVS Learn podcast, and it says, how to evaluate your art foundations. So they're going to talk about something here, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Hopefully you can hear this.
You guys are going through a foundation program right now. There's two things I want to add here. So train your weakness, not your strength. Mm-hmm. A lot of people rely, that's kind of that figure drawing example we gave earlier, where you fall in love with your own work, but you're not actually training the things that you're not good at. If you just train your strength, you're going to leave all these holes in your foundation. And so train your weakness. If you're bad at perspective, learn some perspective. If you're bad at design, learn some design. Even though it's going to be ugly, it's going to be hard because that's not what you're good at, right? For me, drawing was one of my big weaknesses. I could paint really well. I'd never had a problem painting, but drawing, I really had to struggle with it, and I had to focus on it.
So basically, when he said that, it really hit me. There's a couple of things there. The first thing is, I spent so much more time studying gesture because it was easy. It wasn't easy, but it was easier than the structure things. And the thing is with me is, there's a lot of things that I'm not studying because when I try to draw them, they're bad. So there's this thing I've got to get over here, which is the hurdle of drawing bad stuff. So this is why I love studying from courses. When you're studying from courses, it forces you to be okay with bad things. Like if I'm trying to draw, let's say I'm trying to draw an eye from my imagination and I'm not very good at it, if that's what the course is about, you just do it because that's what you're doing. Whereas if you're not studying from a course, if you're just sitting down to draw a load of eyes and you can't really draw the eyes, what I've noticed is I'll start drawing someone else. So this is why I think it's so important to study. And I'm talking to myself here because I've been saying it for so long and I'm not doing anything about it, which is a bit frustrating. But it goes back to, it's a psychological thing with me. I can't, at the moment, I'm still struggling with accepting bad drawings. Yeah, so like the main thing is eyes. But, so again, this Procreate here, I'm going to be studying from this Procreate course, which is all about digital. But hopefully, I haven't even looked in the book yet, hopefully they will be teaching you sort of character things as well. But again, I might get halfway in that book and realise I've got to go off and study more of the basics. So it goes into someone else as well. I spent ages studying realistic pencil drawings. I got quite good at it, but then I realised it wasn't what I loved. I didn't love it as much as characters. When I draw characters, my characters aren't as good, but I love it so much more. But the thing with the characters is it's a completely different set of skills than realistic drawing, but it's also not. This is something I've been learning in the books as well. If you can draw realistically, that's a skill that will help you with creating your characters and stuff. So even though it feels like I've got to go right back to the beginning and relearn character design and stuff, which I'm going through at the moment, I am noticing that a lot of the things I've already learned are helping me here. So it's kind of cool in a way. But what else did he say there? Yeah, he said about what happens. He said something else in a minute in that podcast. He says about what happens is you become a master of like a certain thing, but you can't do anything else. And there was a really good thing in there. He was talking about you you can get good at, say, drawing a character as a triangle. But if you keep drawing that character as a triangle, in other words, if you learn how to draw a stylized character, but you haven't learned how to draw the actual human body, what will happen is, yeah, you might get amazing at drawing that one stylized character, but if you want to draw another type of character, because you don't understand the fact how a human body at the base level, you won't be able to turn it into another different shape. So there is this thing here where there's this constant thing of like having to learn how to do something, and then trying to play around with it to make it up yourself. So again, a bit like how when I'm studying, I'm going through the book, but I'm also going backwards sometimes to recap on things. Same thing happens with you doing your characters. Yeah, you'll do something, but you'll realise that you ain't got quite the skills there, so you've got to go back again. But it goes into what Procreate said as well. What Procreate said was, he said you've got to just go through that. So in other words, if you're trying to learn figure drawing, what he said was, instead of focusing on gesture drawing and just like getting stuck on that, which is what happened to me, he says you've got to go and do your structure, the next bit, and then go right back to the beginning again. So what you begin to realise is like learning how to draw, especially if you're drawing from your imagination. It's a never-ending process. So, and this is the other thing. At the moment, I struggle with eyes, drawing eyes from my imagination. But once I get over that, there'll be something else. It might be then that I struggle with the entire face. So in other words, the thing is, you've got to get over that psychological thing, because it's always going to be there. There's always going to be something you can't draw. Well, you can draw, but you haven't learned how to draw it. So there's always going to be something you haven't learned how to draw. So what it means is, no matter how good you get, you're always going to be having to face something that you've got to learn how to draw it. So if you can't get over that thing of drawing a load of bad drawings, you're never actually going to grow. So that's basically it, really. That's why I love sketching. Studying. I put sketching because I was going to say, I was thinking of topics for this week's podcast. One of the things I thought was, why do I use cheap sketchbooks? The reason is exactly what I'm talking about here at the moment. With me little cheap sketchbooks, I can fill a page of rubbish drawings. Like at the moment, I'm drawing a lot of Peter the Penguins, my little character, Peter the Penguin. Some of them are hideous, but it doesn't matter, because I'm working on cheap paper. I can fill the page with that, and I can just turn the page. If I wanted to, I could rip the page out. If I wanted to, I could just rip the page out and throw it away. If I've got a beautiful sketchbook, I'm going to be a bit scared to sort of do my little rubbish drawings. So that kind of goes into this. It's all sort of linked. Everything's all sort of linked. So the next thing I've got here is traditional notes versus digital notes. This actually goes into exactly the same thing as studying from a traditional book versus studying from an online course. It's exactly the same thing. That screen acts as some sort of like barrier. So there's always this separation. So if I'm doing my notes digitally, especially with the Apple Pencil and the iPad, it almost feels identical to working on the paper. But there is something about having a sheet of paper on your desk that you can move about and like feel it, which you just can't get that with the digital. They've got very close, but I've got this app called Notability. It's brilliant. You can do anything with it, really. But the thing is, again, like I said, when I did it, I just went back to traditional. I just went back to me traditional. So what I do is, I get these little plastic like folder things with these plastic sleeves in them that you can put A4 paper in, and all I do is I get the cheap A4 paper, printer paper. I do all my notes on that, and then I put them all in here. And what's amazing about this is you can keep everything nice and tidy. So what happens is, what I do as well is I put little tags on the side of the thing. So there's one of them here. What's this? Mastering perspective. So if I want to go back through my notes about mastering perspective, I can quickly go to it through here, and bang, let's see what I've got here, look. Here's a little tip. Here's a little tip from the thing, the vanishing points, where all details converge. So if I'd forgot about that, and what I also do is I colour code the headings. So what that does is, if I'm going through my notes, I can quickly look. Let's say I'm struggling with vanishing points. What I can do is I can open up my notes, I can go to Master and Perspective, I can very quickly find the word vanishing points, and I can recap it myself. Now what's brilliant about note taking is, if you're reading from a book, you've got to basically read it from the book and then process it in your head. When you're taking notes, you've already done that. So when you look at your own notes, you're sort of looking at what you've already processed. So you understand it a lot more. And I do little diagrams as well. So this is, again, the power of studying is in the moment you're learning. But the other thing is, later on, when you've sort of forgot it, because you will forget things, you can go back and very quickly recap on yourself, which goes into this week's inspirational quote from Hammond, which is, it's about repetition. She says, repetition is the key to learning. So this is brilliant, I think. Studying is brilliant. Well, how do I study then? What I do is I go through my notes. No, I don't. I go through let's say I'm going through a book. I'll go through a page of the book and I'll read it. So I'll just sit there and I'll read it. Then what I do is I'll take some very rough notes. I normally reread it again. And then I'll read my rough notes, my rough notes, and I'll turn them into a bit more sexy notes. What I do is I go to sleep. And the next day when I come back, I go. The first thing I do is, before I even go into the book, I'll go back through my notes, but I'll like test myself. So let's say what I was doing was I'd been learning 1 point perspective. I'd gone to sleep, and the next day I woke up. What I would do is I'd have a little sheet of paper and I'd write, what is 1 point perspective? And I'd do a little test on myself. And then what I'd do is, once I'd done my little test, I'd go through my notes, I'd compare my notes with what I'd put, and if it synced up, it meant I'd learnt it. If it's not synced up, it means I've got to relearn it. So again, and then the next day, what I'll do is I'll do the same thing again. So it's almost like I'll keep doing that until I've actually learnt it. If I can basically, well, this goes into someone else as well. My mind's all over the place with this because studying is such a big topic. But the thing is, there's two parts to it. There's the learning how to do something, then there's the learning to do it. So, like for instance, 1 point perspective, you've got to learn the rules of 1 point perspective, but you've also got to learn how to do it. So, like, I might be really good at understanding everything about 1 point perspective, but when it comes down to actually draw it, I can't do it. So there's these two bits to studying. There's the learning, like the theory, then there's the practicalness of it. That was one of the things I loved about Bert Dodgson's book, Keys to Drawing. It had a beautiful balance between like the theory and the actual exercises. And I feel like maybe the reason I do this little thing where I test myself the next day is because in Bert Dodgson's book, that's what he did. In Bert Dodgson's book, what he did was, at the end of each chapter, you had to critique yourself, and you did a recap of the whole chapter. Also, SVS Learn did a very similar thing with that, like with the little recaps at the end and stuff. But it's brilliant is, what else have we got here? Repetition. Well, this is it. It's all about repetition. If you keep repeating something, in the end, you don't even have to think about it. You just do it. So I even know that, like drawing eyes, if I just sit down and draw eyes, as long as I'm drawing them, as long as I'm studying how to draw eyes, if I keep drawing them, in the end, you will get good at it. No matter what you're doing, if you keep doing something, in the end you're going to get good at it. As long as you're not practicing bad habits. So this is why you need feedback. This is another advantage, though, actually, of the digital courses, especially like SVS Learn, and also Proke's done it now. Stan Prokopenko, he's got like a forum and everything now. So SVS Learn have got the same thing. So if you're working through one of these courses, let's say, well, let's have a look here. There's one. Let's have a look at one of these things here. Talking about sculpting a character. The course was called Sculpting for Character Consistency. What you had to do on this one was you had to create a little character. I actually created a little one of my little Sophies. But let's say one of the bits is he's talking about something, and in the video I can't understand it. I really can't understand it. The beautiful thing about online courses is you can actually contact them straight away. So you can go on the forums and get feedback, or you can actually email the artist and say, look, can you help me with this? You can send photos and everything. With an art book, you can probably do that if you track down the artist, but the thing is, who's to say they're going to get back to you? Whereas with an online course, they will get back to you, because that's part of the package. So you sort of see how there's advantages to digital and there's advantages to traditional as well. It's quite cool. Slow. I've put the word slow. So for instance, when I was studying from the book Lifelike Portraits from Photographs by Hammond, I must have studied from that it must have taken me about 6 months, at least 6 months. So I went through it really slowly, and I also, every little drawing inside of the book, so the book is full of little sketches as she builds up like the forms. So she builds up a nose, for instance, teaching you how to draw the nose. Now, nowhere did it say, I want you to draw these. There's a bit where you've got to do it, but what I did was I actually drew each little drawing as a thing. Again, repetition. If I'm drawing all these noses, even when she's not telling me to, I'm going to get better at drawing noses. So that's another thing. And then the other thing is, if you're sort of going through your notes as you're taking notes, if you're constantly going back through your notes, you're repeating the things you're learning. So you could probably get through this book in I reckon a month if you wanted to like zoom through it, but you're not going to learn it as much. So for me, there's a big thing about the repetition there. And again, this also goes into these online courses. What you notice is a lot of these exercises that these like SBS Learn, a lot of the exercises you have to do the same thing over and over and over again. You just have to create pages and pages of the same thing. And also they do say that this is a lot of them are exercises you don't ever stop doing them. Like one of them, for instance, you got to just draw a load of ellipses to get used to the shape of what these ellipses look like, because you're always going to be drawing ellipses. So one of the exercises is just fill in pages with these ellipses. But they also say just because you filled 50 pages, you don't stop there. So when you're in your sketchbook, you can just sit there and fill a sketchbook full of these ellipses. They also give you these ways to like measure your ellipses, so you can sort of check that what you've drawn is correct, because you want to make sure all the things are the same. So that's another thing really. You're learning things but you're never going to stop learning. Like I said, it's a never-ending process. But what I've noticed is I'm somebody who needs structure. So as I'm working through these courses, I will fill pages and pages of these ellipses. What I've noticed is if I move on to another course, for some reason I will just stop doing the ellipses, even though I know that I should be carrying on doing it. It's almost like I need somebody to say, look, you got to keep doing these ellipses. But then at the same time, you can't spend the rest of your life drawing ellipses. So you've got to get the balance thing there going on. Yeah, a lot of this is about balance, I think. There's a balance between traditional and digital. There's a balance between like learning, taking your notes, but there's a balance between taking your notes, like studying, and also practicing. So that's that. What's this here? Look, repeat what? Yeah. Mention Procreate. I've put a little mention Procreate. So what I'm going to be doing is, starting on the 1st of August, I don't know if it's going to be, I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to start on the 1st of August or whether the first video will be on the 1st of August. What I'm going to do is each week I'm going to put out a little video on my YouTube as I'm studying from Procreate. Not sure if I'm going to do it on the podcast yet or not, but what I'm going to do is, as I'm going through this book, I'm going to be studying, practicing, because I've basically not really used Procreate before. I've only used Procreate for about 2 hours, I reckon. So I'm very much a newbie. So this is going to be, I'm going to go through the experience of what is it like to start learning Procreate. I'm going to make videos about it each week. got the hiccups, and I think this will be really fun. But again, like I said, I'm going to do very slowly. Yeah, very slowly. So it might be that one week I do a video, the next week might be the same sort of video, but there's always going to be things to learn. That's what I noticed. I feel like that's it, actually. So what is my main takeaway? My main takeaway is studying is amazing, because the thing I love about studying more than anything is you've got a structure, especially if you've got a really good art book. You've got a structure, so it's easy for me to focus. You get little results. The main thing I love about studying is you see yourself getting better. That's what I love. I actually love studying. I love learning. I find it really fun, because you sort of, what happens is you're going, especially when you go back through your notes, you see yourself evolving. So that motivates you, and it just inspires you to keep going. So for me, I would say studying is the most fun part of drawing. Well, no, it's not. The most fun part is once you're really good and you can draw things without even thinking about it. But it's that middle bit I don't like. The first bit is fun when you're studying, because you're learning things and it's exciting. The end bit is fun when you've learned enough that you can draw what you want to draw. That's amazing. The middle bit where you're struggling, that's the bit that's hard. Yeah, that's the bit that's hard. Because there's this middle bit where you've got no structure, because you've sort of outgrown the book. Well, you ain't outgrown it, but you're sort of trying to do it on your own. But you've got stuff you still haven't learnt. And then because you haven't got a structure, I sort of think, well, I don't know where to go to get the help for this. So you can't quite get to that end point. But that was one of the things with the realistic drawings. I got to the end point, and then I realised, I don't really like it here. Well, I do. Yeah. So but that was good though. I think that's good, because it's not until you actually start doing something that you realise whether you like it or not. But he also talked about this on the podcast, on that 3-point perspective. He said you don't want to get stuck just learning. Yeah, because like you could end up spending the rest of your life like studying, but not actually pushing yourself to practice what you've studied. Because that for me is like some sort of fear thing. It's what I think that is you know that if you start trying to practice it, you're not going to be as good as you think you are. So instead of trying to practice it, you just carry on studying things. So you've got to be very careful. Yeah, you've got to basically at some point start drawing things which don't look good. So it's going to make you feel uncomfortable. But the best way to be prepared is to study. It's quite cool. All that's left is this week's little inspirational quote. lilDENNiS is going to end it for us. I hope you enjoyed that. If you've got any if you've got any tips or anything, any advice, or maybe ways to sort of bridge the gap between that disconnect with studying digitally, like note taking or something, because I would love to have all my notes on the computer, on the on like the iPad or something. I'd love to have all my notes digitally, because it'd be so much easier to search for things. Let's say I wanted to search for perspective. If I had all my notes digitally, I could look for all the files with the word perspective in it, and you'd have it all there. Whereas when it's traditional, you've got to do it yourself. So that's sort of time consuming. It's weird, isn't it? I feel like the best thing would be merging digitally and traditional together somehow, taking the best bits of each one. But basically all that's left is this week's little inspirational quote. You can find show notes and everything at sophielawson.com, and also videos at youtube.com/sophielawson. I've recently put out the latest issue of the Imagine FX magazine, issue 203. It's a beautiful issue, that. I'll put a link in the description and everything. That's one of my favourites, that is. I've also put out a series of videos about the iMac. So these podcasts and videos, they're now getting rendered on my iPad, on my iMac, and it's a lot faster. So I'm actually saving a lot of time there. But that was a bit risky because it was a broken iMac. I had to try and fix it. So I enjoyed doing those videos, eh? It was like a little adventure. It was quite cool. So this week's little inspirational quote, it goes from this book, How to Draw Lifelike Portraits from Photographs by the artist Hammond. And I have memorised this quote because it's one of those quotes that every now and again somebody will say something and it goes in there and it feels so powerful. But the main thing is it keeps coming up. It keeps coming up, and you realise how powerful it is as you're going through your life. So this one by Hammond is: repetition is the key to learning. Practice is the key to success. What I love about that is, it's basically repetition and practice. That's all it is, really. So what you've got to remember is when you're learning, just remember repetition. So in other words, as you're learning, no matter what you're learning, repeat it. Even if you think it's really inside your head, repeat it again. Because repetition is the key to learning. And then with practice is the key to success. So it goes back to that thing I said earlier. You've got to learn the theory, but you've also got to learn how to actually do it, which is only going to happen by doing it. So like repetition, there's the learning, and then there's the actual practicing of it. So for me, that is the best quote ever. It's like a reminder of the two main ingredients, I think, of growing as an artist, which is repetition and practice. So this week's little inspirational quote: repetition is the key to learning, practice is the key to success. Hammond. Enjoyed that. That was good. I think I'm going to end with a little